Hey guys, how you going? This is BillyEatWorld again, and today we're going to take a look at something completely different and kick off a new series looking at World War II movies. Because, well, with Battlefield 5 just around the corner, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're all getting, especially me, pretty pumped up for this setting in general. Also, secondly, one of the things DICE said at the reveal of BF5 was how they'd watched all the movies so that they could approach the new game in a fresh new way. But in saying that, maybe you're just not that up to speed with World War II history, in which case you probably have no idea what that even means. So in a nutshell, that's why in this series we're going to take a look at some of my favourite movies in this genre and the real history behind the battles they depict, which hopefully should give you guys a much better understanding of not only the history of this period, but also some of the tropes that DICE might try to avoid in Battlefield 5. And speaking of World War II tropes, well, what better movie to kick off with than probably the most famous movie in this genre of the last few decades, Saving Private Ryan. But in saying that, I should make it clear before we get started that this isn't a movie review, so if you haven't already seen it, then there isn't going to be any spoilers, because all we're going to get into is the real history right now. So, to kick off, the setting for the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan and one of the most iconic battles of World War II is Operation Neptune, better known as D-Day. And basically what this was the Allied invasion of German-held Western Europe at the beaches of Normandy, France, which took place on the 6th of June 1944. It was up until that point the biggest amphibious assault in history, with over 156,000 British, American and Canadian troops facing off against around 50,000 German defenders. And as you can see on screen now, the fighting was so fierce that during the 12-hour battle, the Allies suffered around 10,000 casualties, and it's estimated the Germans could have suffered up to 9,000 as well. Of the Allied forces, the US played arguably the biggest role on D-Day and definitely paid by far the biggest price in casualties. And we've heard their story in various forms over the years, but the lesser-known story is actually that of the British and Canadians who fought alongside Polish, Norwegian and French forces on the same day. Also, it's easy from pop culture to forget there were actually 5 beaches assaulted on D-Day, not just Utah and Omaha to the west, but also Gold, Juno and Sword to the east. And not just that, there was also a small but fierce assault by US Army Rangers in between Omaha and Utah Beach at the promontory known as Point du Hoc. Now, beyond the Normandy landings themselves, I think most people's knowledge of the history of this battle starts to get a bit hazy, because what was to follow was a much wider scale struggle lasting over around 2 months into late August, which would come to be known as the Normandy Breakout. As you can see throughout the movie, the Normandy region in France at the time was a country region of green pastures crisscrossed with thick hedgerows. And this, along with the fact that the Germans were held up in the villages and towns of the region, led to a lot of bloody ambushes and close quarters fighting. Another interesting aspect of the campaign that Saving Private Ryan delves into is the involvement of airborne forces, which was still a relatively new concept at the time. And what I mean by this is that on D-Day, around 17,000 US parachute and glider troops were dropped in behind enemy lines to delay the Germans and secure river crossings. As for how the movie itself deals with this, well, I won't spoil it for you, but I will say a large part of the ending is aimed at showing the challenges and the sort of missions the airborne would have faced. For example, as often happens in wartime, things don't always go to plan, which resulted in many paratroopers being separated from their units or from their equipment and supplies. Now, all in all, the Allies were eventually successful in breaking out of Normandy, but probably the least known aspect of the campaign, and something that isn't really covered in the movie, is how close it could have been to disaster. Because in anticipation of the Allied attacks, Hitler had actually ordered the construction of a chain of fortresses along the coast of Western Europe called the Atlantic Wall. The problem is that the Germans focused a lot of attention and resources on areas of little strategic importance, like for example the former British Channel Islands. And not just that, most importantly, through an elaborate web of deception, the Allies were able to fool them into thinking they were going to attack to the northeast at the Pas de Calais. Also, we have this inflated image from popular culture about the invincibility of German forces during World War II, and in particular of their generals. And bearing this in mind, many people think the commander in charge of the Normandy defence, Erwin Rommel, could have easily been a match for the Allies if the German High Command, and especially Hitler, hadn't held him back. Not just that, but it is important to note that the German forces in 1944 just weren't up to the same standard as those that originally invaded France, and most importantly, they didn't have air superiority. And so eventually, even with Hitler's wonder weapons that we hear about all the time, like the Tiger tanks and the Sturmgewehr, the Allies just eventually overwhelmed the Germans by sheer numbers alone. But anyway, to wrap up, even though it is a work of fiction, all in all, I think Saving Private Ryan is definitely a pretty good historical representation of the Normandy campaign. And although it doesn't really cover every aspect in detail, and there are a few inaccuracies, like I said before, it really does try and give you a broad taste of what it would have been like to be a US soldier on the ground. But just on that point though, obviously since this movie came out, so many other movies and games in particular have done this particular story to death in the style of Saving Private Ryan. But in saying that, when I say done to death, I don't think pop culture needs to take a break from D-Day altogether. I just think there's a ton of other parts of the story that could be told, and maybe even in Battlefield 5. But anyway guys, I guess that just about wraps up this video, so make sure you let me know what you think of Saving Private Ryan in the comments section down below. Also, let me know what your other favourite World War II movies are, and let me know which one you'd like to see featured in this series next. As always though, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and please feel free to check out the links in the description if you want to see any more of my videos. And also don't forget you can also find my Twitter and Discord links down there as well if you want to keep in touch with me. And as always, until next time, see you later and have a good one.